There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello, BookTube. I'm Shawn Breeze Books. Welcome back to my channel and another of this glorious, it has morphed into an Edith Wharton book club, and I think most of us are quite happy about that, if not all of us. And today we're here to talk about Edith Wharton's collection of 4 novellas called Old New York. I believe it was published in 1924. And as usual, I am here to talk about it with 3 lovely, brilliant folks. We have Chris of the fabulous book podcast, The Book Cougars, joining us from Connecticut, and James, whose debut novel came out a year and a bit ago, and it's called Gibbons, or One Bloody Thing After Another. And he is now on BlueSky as caustic cover critic, joining us from Adelaide in Australia.
That's right. Hi.
And finally, Dorian, joining us from Little Rock, and he is I'm glad I didn't practice your blog name. He's got a fabulous blog. I think it's pronounced Eager Jungfrau, and also co-host of a great bookish podcast called One Break Book. All of those details will be in the show notes, and I'm dying to get into chatting about this series of 4 novellas. Let's start with Dorian. Dorian, what did you make of this? And in fact, I'm going to actually ask each of you, unless you think it's a goofy question, but did one stand out above the others, and was there one that was weaker than the others in amongst sharing your general reaction?
I like that question. I think that's a good question. Thanks again for hosting, Shawn. I was really glad to have the chance to read this book. I had my eye on it for a while. I thought it was great. I think Edith Wharton is great. It's not a minority opinion, right? Yeah, I did think that I like maybe both her short stories and her novels a little better than these novellas. Her short stories, I think, are just terrific, the ones that I've read of them at any rate. But I like these a lot. And in terms of and I think that we'll probably get into this, but the way in which this is conceived of as a collection and having them together is pretty important, I think. And so I like that aspect of it quite a bit. So for me, I think the first, they're set by decades, right? There's 1840s, 1850s, 1860s, 1870s, though I hope we will talk about the fact that those are the time periods of which the precipitating event happens, but not necessarily when the story is being told, etc., which is pretty important. I thought that the first novella was the weakest one, in my opinion. I didn't think it was bad or anything, but the other 3 popped a little bit more for me. And I don't know if it would be possible for me to choose just one of those. I guess maybe I can't even remember the title. The last one, New Year's Day, might be my favorite, but nothing but good things to say. What about you guys? James,
Yeah, I feel similarly. I think she's, as a short story, as a novelist, she's fantastic. She's written multiple masterpieces, but as a short story writer, she's pretty much unimpeachable. I don't know, you'd be hard pressed, even if you just do a subset of her short stories, like just the ghost stories or something.
Yeah.
They're fantastic.
So good.
I'm a huge fan of novellas anyway, so this kind of conception for a book is my cup of tea. But yeah, I would agree with Dorian that perhaps the novellas excellent are not quite as strong as her stories or her novels. But yeah, I felt similarly. I did the first one because it's probably one of the earliest examples of the kind of temporal ironic thing of someone that we as the readers in the present day know how it pans out, but everyone in the story is like, oh, that'll never catch on. Like that idiot bit in Titanic where someone's got a Picasso and they're like, this will never catch on. But I do like the way that even though this is perhaps the start of the cliche, she does turn it on its head by having the guy who is smart enough to know the way things will pan out also completely fails and dies in penury and misery. But yeah, I think probably the last 2 novellas, The Spark and New Year's Day, were probably my favorite. I like they both involve quite different looks at adultery and quite different attitudes in the worlds, even though it's the same world that these people are living in. The effects of someone's known affairs are viewed so differently, and I just like the kind of counterpoint of the 2 of them together. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. I had read this years ago, but I couldn't remember anything about it. Yeah, other than I'd liked it.
Chris, do you mind going third?
Nice.
I've never gone
Oh,
third.
I don't mind. I don't mind at all. I really enjoyed all 4 of them. And I think actually The Old Maid was my favorite. I think that was the one that stood out. I felt like that was such a page turner for me. And I'm not usually into stories about motherhood or mothers and children necessarily, but I was so like whipping through the pages, wondering, oh my God, how is this going to turn out? Like I had no idea how it was going to turn out. And I, you know what? I don't really feel like these were novellas necessarily. It's just a little bit over 300 pages. It's just barely over 300 pages.
Right.
For me, they felt more like short stories, maybe long short stories, or I just don't, I'm not that committed to novellas. Maybe I just haven't read enough of them, possibly. But yeah, I really like The Old Maid, and I enjoyed all of them. And I have to say, maybe the first one was a bit of the weakest one. That was the False Dawn. But what I liked about that one, and we can talk about this as we get into it, is just how she drops that. What is it? The sister's going to see Mrs. Poe, and I was like,
Oh yeah.
Mrs. Poe,
Yeah.
and I was like,
I
holy
forgot
shit, it
that.
is
Yeah.
that Mrs.
Yeah.
Poe.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really interesting. And then I think it
Yeah.
was the last story as well, she drops a lot of author names. And I enjoyed that. I always like when I'm reading something, especially an older work that refers to other writers. It always gets me a little excited.
Great. Yeah. Now that I'm looking at the page count, like in this edition, the three of us read, the first one is just over maybe 70 pages. I think that would qualify as a long short story. Second one's 100. I think that's somewhere around there is the cutoff between a long short story and a novella, but that's what publishers say. And the second one is, yeah, it's barely 60 pages. Yeah, we certainly could look at it as a collection of short stories. I loved it. I loved it. I thought that its portrayal of an entrenched formality and conformity and the rebellion against that, that's what I thought was through most, if not all, of the stories. And I thought she showed that really well. And adultery, definitely in the last two. I would agree with Chris. My favorite was The Old Maid, but the fourth one would come a close second. I loved those last two so much. I think I enjoyed the first one, False Dawn, more than it sounds like the rest of you. I quite loved it. And I thought the weak link here was the third one, The Spark. And I guess it's because whatever his name was, the old man, he wasn't all that interesting. And there wasn't a whole lot going on there. And I found the Walt Whitman thing a little bit belabored. Haley was that guy's name, and he was a Civil War veteran. There were things about it I enjoyed, but for me, it was the weakest of the three. For me, I loved the second and the fourth. Those are the two that I thought.
Yeah.
So great. I'm glad we all enjoyed it to varying degrees. And so where should we go now?
Just before we do, it's interesting actually, because when I was looking around about this, The Old Maid is the one, I don't know, maybe just because it's the longest, so it's the easiest to publish as a separate book, but a lot of people have just published that by itself, which may be a testament to it being a sort of favorite amongst the four.
And made into a movie in like the 30s or 40s or something.
Oh, really?
Oh,
Wow.
I didn't know that.
That's interesting.
I only scanned the Wikipedia. I know that what I just said is true, but I think there might have even been two different versions of it made.
Wow,
Right?
that'd be interesting. Yeah, I could see how that would be
Yeah.
a popular one because it deals with motherhood, and that's just such a perennially popular topic.
And it's probably
Especially if
the
it's
most plotty of the four.
Yeah, as you were saying, Chris,
Yeah.
with the page turning thing, right? It's very dramatic, right? So I could absolutely see that as the
Yeah.
one that might be more fit for film adaptation.
And it's a bit heartbreaking and really, I think with all of Wharton's stories, you just get so aggravated and just frustrated with these characters. And there are some you just want to whack somebody
Yeah.
upside the head sometimes. And that happened a lot with The Old Maid, with the characters.
There's so much judgment going on in the texts, right? People are judging each other constantly, overtly, covertly, passive aggressive combinations of overt and covert, that there's a strange way, I think, in which that, like, maybe as readers we're inclined to feel similarly, or some of that kind of like judgmental quality is like seeping out towards us in some ways, right? But it's a really striking feature of the text.
Absolutely. Before we go any further, do the spoiler announcement. We couldn't be bothered to worry about spoilers talking about 4 short stories or 4 novellas. So consider yourself warned. We're not going to keep anything from you. We're not going to talk about everything that happens probably, but we're not going to worry about spoilers. The final novella, we're going to give you a spoiler warning on that. That's the only thing we think is worthy of our time and energy to protect you. But so you'll get a warning if we get into that.
Just
And
pause the video and go read the book and then come back.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or be like me and watch the video and then you'll just forget everything anyways when you read the book.
I know I feel like I'm jumping around a bit, but that fourth one, I didn't see it coming, the ending.
No, it's
At all.
Yeah.
It was brilliant. So we're going to give you a little bit of the kind of general idea of each novel, including its protagonist. So I'm going to start with False Dawn, and it was set in the 1840s. And its protagonist is Louis Racy, and he's 21. And his dad, who is a real old New York, isn't he a farmer?
That can't be right.
No, I think he's an investant. He's investing or something like that.
Obviously.
Yeah. Like he's from old money because of oh, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself.
I mean,
but yeah,
you see what's happening here? Shawn is from Saskatchewan, and that a farmer, that's everything there.
That's
an investor, investment banker, that's a farmer. A lawyer, that's a farmer.
He's the man who's wonderfully described as being the same dimensions in every breadth, width, and height. Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
Yes.
The novel opens with a whole bunch of his dad's old friends, and they're all drinking to send off the son the next morning to go to Europe. And his dad is giving him a big chunk of change to go buy some European art to bring back for his collection. His dad thinks art is important, but he doesn't know a damn thing about it, and he's trusting his son to pick out some stuff. And Louis has a grand old time in Europe and comes back, and his father absolutely hates the art that he's got and dies of apoplexy because of this, how much he hates the art his son's back, and cuts him out of the will except for that art. I think that's enough. There's more to it than that, but that's the basic premise of False Dawn. How about the title of that one? What does it mean? False Dawn.
I assume it was just that the son has seen the truth. The dawn's risen for him, but no one else gets it. So what seems like this sort of encountering and discovery of this new world of forgotten art just dies with him, and it's not until later on that the real dawn happens. But yeah,
that's right. So he spends the rest of his life trying to exhibit this art and get people, the art critics of the day, to respond to it, to no avail. But at the very end, we learn that a decade or so later, it becomes really popular. Wasn't it 15th century Italian art, most of it?
I think so,
really
yeah.
old art.
Yeah, like obscure religious art.
Obscure religious art. It suddenly became really popular. But it
turns out that he's been, all the stuff that he's bought that is high quality, he's been doing on the advice of John Ruskin and Dante Gabriel Rossetti and people like that, which I think is probably the appearance of them in that story that maybe slightly undercuts the effectiveness of the Walt Whitman stuff in the third story too. I suspect that without that, the other one might have worked slightly more.
I was hoping I could get a chance to squeeze this into the discussion. I just read 10 minutes before we met tonight a really lovely profile of Edith Wharton in the New York Times, like in the last 12 years or something, that said that maybe John Ruskin was the only other kind of famous person of that century that entered a marriage completely naive about sexual matters. And she went to her mother the night before her wedding, Edith Wharton, and she said, "Do you have anything to tell me, Mom?" And she said, "You've seen the nude statues at the museum. What else do you need to know?"
God. So in that story, I was struck by the whole thing about like their old wealth, and they are not risk takers. And they only decided to start like investing money in the cause for the Civil War once it was obvious that was a safe social bet. So they are so conservative with their money, and the family is above democracy. So that resonated on some levels with what's going on in certain countries today, putting the family above country and investing for the sake of just increasing wealth and not really valuing art, but just wanting what has value.
Because these paintings end up like in some distant relative's attic, and like they're just, and the heirs of that person or something are about to throw these away, or they get the junkman in or whatever, or they just happen to, before they get the junkman in, they're like, let's at least ask some art guy if they're anything, and then they turn it to be extraordinarily valuable. So that kind of critique of this, of the social class of old New York, which runs all through these novellas, is there right from the very beginning of this first one.
In there.
Yeah. And that first one, the end of it all, the best The best of the joke is that Jim was just thinking of divorcing her when the pictures were discovered.
Yeah.
So, all the reason to stay married, because
Right.
now we have even more wealth.
Yeah. Yeah.
James, would you be willing to do the second one? The old
Yeah,
maid?
so the second one's The Old Maid, which is the 1850s story. And you've got these two relatives, Delia Lovell, who marries James Ralston. Anyway, they've been married for a while, and again, a very comfortably well-off, wealthy family. And her cousin Charlotte Lovell, who everyone has been like, this woman's destined to be an old maid. She was sick. She had a romantic attachment that everyone thinks was pretty weak, and she got sick and she went off to the country for a while, and she came back and she's looked ill ever since, and everyone was, she's going to be an old maid for all her life. And then she suddenly announces that she's getting married, and from that things start to come out about her past. And this is where we're going to have to ruin any spoiler things, because it turns out that the attachment she had was much stronger. She got pregnant, she went off, had the baby, gave the baby up, but since then has been funding a charity for orphan kids, which is a way of kind of secretly being in contact with her own child. And the fact that then Delia learns all this means she decides to kill the imminent marriage off, because of the scandal and the horror of it all. But she simultaneously effectively adopts the child of her cousin. And that then leads to this kind of ongoing life where there are these two mothers, one real but unacknowledged, one acknowledged but not the actual mother, who are raising this daughter who grows up to be quite a sort of rich, spoiled, flighty person. And the tension and conflict then between the two women who are in that kind of mother role, one way or the other.
It's very heartbreaking. It is great. I didn't shout it out as my favorite, but it's a terrific story.
And completely convincing in terms of its insight into both the women and the position they find themselves. Like,
because I think a piece of information you didn't mention, James, I think is very important, is that Delia, like the guy who fathered this child.
Yes, of course. Sorry,
it was Delia's first love, who she had to give up because he was unsuitable. He was not conservative enough, safe enough, etc. And so there's that extra kind of like dimension. I mean, it was reminding me a little bit of Roman Fever, this really terrific story of Wharton's. And sometimes she just can be, I don't know if cruel is the right word. I don't think that's quite right, but there's so much sharpness behind the manners in these stories.
And she's perfect at that, finding that the position of greatest tension, where it's not unbelievable, it's not like melodramatically unbelievable, but just where two people find themselves at like the kind of maximum tension of jealousies and resentments, and no one in the story is the villain, no one in the story is trying to do harm. Everyone's doing what they think is best, and not just what's best for themselves, but it just leads to everyone being miserable.
Yeah. And people who know things, like know passion, are the ones who can't reveal it socially. But she's the one who kind of saves Tina from making a mistake, and is downstairs when she comes home with the guy from dancing all night, because she knows what's going to happen. Yeah, and then who's going to have the night before the wedding conversation with her?
Yeah.
This is where I should have snuck in that.
that speaks to your anecdote there, Shawn. Yeah.
But what made this work on in such a deep way for me was the complexity of Delia and her cousin Charlotte. That there was genuine affection. There was incredible envy. They were conflicted, but what made it also poignant was that there was genuine concern and affection, especially.
And they do both want the best for each other and for the child. No one's trying to win, but it's still
really like it was as complicated as life is with relationships.
Yeah, totally. They're at the end, they are both in the position of becoming old maids together, right? As this child that they've shared is getting married and is leaving. Delia's own children have already left beforehand, so it's very
Delia's own children who barely even characters, really interestingly enough.
Yeah. And they're like entombed basically in this house, because they're only like in their late 40s, early 50s, and they're
But
they're entombed, and they have what's going to happen to two old women living in this house that's going to be empty now. And that just speaks to the social status that they're in, that they can't pursue anything really. They can't work, they can't pursue a passion necessarily. They don't really, do they have much money? I don't know that they have much expendable
Delia does.
income.
She
Does
she
she?
does. They're not as rich as some of these other characters, but Delia's perfectly comfortable and so is able to keep Charlotte. Charlotte would not be on her own. So there's so much of this kind of like who's indebted to whom, who's subservient to whom, and yet,
Right.
as James was saying, there is still this kind of like genuine sort of care for each other as well. Like it's very nuanced. Like
And what you do impacts the entire family
mm,
and that
mm,
family's social standing. So like they're
mm,
also walking that line as
right,
well.
true.
This one in particular, but I think all of them, there was a whole bunch of important stuff going on with gender that was also subtle and nuanced. And so I just want to share this quote from The Old Maid. Social tolerance was not dealt in the same measure to men and to women, and neither Delia nor Charlotte had ever wondered why. Like all the young
Mm,
women of their class, they simply bowed to the ineluctable.
mm,
And this was one of the few stories where race comes up,
mhm,
where they
Yes.
talk about the potential suitor wouldn't want these black children around because of the disease that they carry,
Mm.
is one of this awful stereotypes, and they
mhm.
think that their wealth protects them from disease by racial segregation, basically.
Yeah, these are the other children in the orphanage that
In the
Yeah.
orphanage, yeah.
And it's actually interesting
yeah.
because it made me realize how little, in fact, broadly speaking, race figures in Wharton's
Yeah,
fiction
Mhm.
overall. I guess
totally.
Yeah.
because it's so much of it is European or very northern US based, but
Uh-huh.
it so rarely comes up. It was surprising to see it here. Actually, that's the other thing. That sort of disconnects with the next story, but
It
it was
doesn't. It's
interesting
just yeah.
reading stuff about people who were there for the American Civil War, but because they are like up in the northern states, how little really it figured in day-to-day life. It was a cause for exciting stories, and some people went off to fight, but it was easy enough to not fight, and it was easy enough to ignore it happening. It was because you get the
Mhm.
impression from fiction written later that it was this kind of all-consuming thing affecting the whole country, but in fact, obviously, the richer you were and the further you were physically removed, it was actually just sort of just something on the news. So yeah.
There's a perfect
Yeah.
quote about that in the next novella, but before I read it, and I'm not going to read it, it's too long. I'll read a couple lines of it or something. But Dorian, set us up with the third one, the spark.
Sure. The passage that you read from The Old Maid, Shawn, was a great example of that fantastic omniscient voice that Wharton so often uses. Then we get to the spark and we suddenly have a first person narration, and it's quite surprising. I found, anyway, surprised me, especially because then the status of the first person narrator is initially quite marginal in the story and then becomes more important as that novella goes along. So the spark is the 1860s story, and it is the one that's most overtly concerned with the Civil War, as James was saying. But it is importantly being told from the position of the 1890s, and of course is being written by Wharton in the 1920s. So there's those series of temporal gaps there that's pretty important. And the central, gosh, I'm bad with the character's name. Sorry. It's Haley something or other, right?
Haley
Yeah.
Delay.
Haley DeLay is the main character, I guess we might say. And who is called by his wife in the first words of the text, "You idiot." And this is
Right.
in this poker game, and she's frustrated with his playing or whatever. He's introduced to us as like doltish and clueless. His wife is notorious for having affairs with younger men, whether consummate or not, unclear, but she's always got some favorites, and this is all going on under his nose. And
But
that's
he's always
also
good
kind of
humored too.
yeah, and he knows kind of doesn't know like it's kind of an initial presentation of him as just I don't know uninspiring in various ways, right? The narrator, who's this much younger person, right? So the 1890s generation, becomes gradually closer and closer with Haley and comes to admire him more and more. They work in the same law firm, for example, and that it's not a father-son thing that the narrator explicitly says. It's like an older brother, younger brother situation, right? So the meat of the text, I guess, centers on the changing responses that the narrator sees his changing responses to how Haley responds to his wife. And again, the sort of that we change our feelings about that character as we go along, because he seems to be actually much more enlightened, more aware of what's going on than we might previously have thought. He is shown to be good-hearted, gentle, thoughtful person. His kindness to animals is a really important kind of motif in the story, right? And his wife has this wastrel, classic kind of wastrel of a father that threatens to bring the family into further kind of ill repute and stuff. And Haley is extremely generous, first in giving lots of money to this old guy who gambles away and drinks it away and stuff, and eventually taking him in, even to the point when his wife doesn't think that should happen and isn't even around. She disappears for a while. So there's this kind of closeness. So it becomes more about the intimacy between the narrator and Haley than anything else, because there's this secondary plot line of the narrator's fascination with what happened in the Civil War, his realization that many of the men in this old New York community did not necessarily serve, or for ways that James was like talking about. His own father did not, and there's something about America, a first step in coming to terms with that event in some ways, right? This sense of honor and things. This is one of the motifs that's happening in the story. Haley never makes a big deal about his military service, but he does, and this is the last thing I'll say, he repeatedly invokes this guy who was in a hospital. He was wounded, and he was in a military hospital for a long time, and there was someone there who was an orderly who helped him until he disappeared one day, and he said all these things that were so moving to Haley and shaped his life in many ways. And then in the sort of punchline of the story, and in this sense, I think that's kind of the weakest part of the story. It has a joke element of it, but we could talk more about that. This guy turns out to have been Walt Whitman, whose poetry the narrator finds amazing, but who Haley finds his poetry not like poetry at all, completely, and is in fact sad. He's delighted to finally learn the name of this person, but sad to the poetry just does nothing for him at all. In fact, disgusts him in a certain way. So there's a weird kind of punchline effect, which happens a few times in these texts. But I did find the relationship between the two men, which you don't initially think is going to be particularly important in the story, to be quite fascinating. Okay, that was a long summary. Sorry, but
fantastic.
It's like complicated that text.
It's a hard one to do in a couple of lines. So
yeah,
it is. Yeah.
So much of
I
what
mean,
resonates with the final novella.
Yeah. And the Civil War aspect was just fascinating about how, like, the rise of the collective memory and
right. That's a good way
what
to put
the
it.
country is deciding on what that meant,
Yeah.
And it's really interesting when you look at the percentages of citizens who did participate in America's wars. It's never been all that high. Even World War II, they made it sound like every able-bodied man was out there enlisting or being drafted, and that's not the case at all. It
Interesting.
was fascinating to see this. Wharton was pretty close to the Civil War generation to know. So that's what I think, that this story felt really true in a way about the attitudes about Civil War veterans and who fought
Right.
and who didn't and why. I really appreciated that, and seeing how the collective memory
Yeah.
started coming to be about what something as profound as that war meant.
That's so interesting, Chris, because it also makes me think back to our last conversation about A Son at the Front, where, because she must have had World War One in mind. And so certainly she's just written that book, and it has been so important to her and stuff. And so that collective memory is just coming to be in its first form, right? So it's really interesting to think about this text as a kind of, I don't know, a chance for her to deflect in some way what's going on in her current moment into this other situation in the past.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I didn't even think about A Son at the Front. But then you think about how the United States didn't enter World War One for the longest time,
Yeah.
and then they did, and thought they just won the whole thing for everybody.
Yeah, as
coming in with
suggested by executive order from current president just this week. Makes me freaking crazy. Anyway, you can edit that out, Shawn.
And
Sorry.
she just think, as she did with Son of the Front, even though she knew all the stuff and could have written stuff, sat at the front. In this, a character who was involved in all these significant things happening in the Civil War.
Totally.
But again, you barely hear anything about. He's so diffident about his own experience. The only thing he talks about is being afterwards when he's wounded and in hospital. And though she could have, I'm sure she knew and could have done, she's never unconvincing from whatever viewpoint, whatever era of a character is that she draws on. She's never unconvincing gender-wise either.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think if you didn't know, if this was a blind, if no one knew Edith Wharton, you would, I think, reading this book, it would be very hard, I think, to pick. I suspect you'd probably come down on the side that she was female just because I guess the attention to domestic details that was not something male writers at the time were necessarily very good at. But in terms of the voices of the characters and the viewpoints, she's completely convincing in every time. In every
totally.
case.
Yeah, and
Mhm.
because women don't actually figure particularly importantly in the spark and that first
Mm.
person male voice, which is, I'm sure you'll talk about this, Chris, with the last text, like also another first person male voice that's at the kind of frame of the story. And yeah, completely, like you say, James, completely convincing. It's so impressive.
The whole thing of the vanished old New York, there's a bit here. He here is Haley. He and Major de Trancy had one trait in common, the extreme caution of the old New Yorker. They viewed with instinctive distrust anything likely to derange their habits, diminish their comfort, or lay on them any unwanted responsibilities, civic or social. It goes on from there. But anytime old New York was mentioned in any of the novellas, I perked my ears up, and there's
Sure.
something in each one.
Yeah.
I was going to say one reason I think I maybe enjoyed this one more than anyone else's. I just like too the idea of this guy who you'd think in his life is much provoked by his wife's infidelities or presumed infidelities, and he finally snaps and beats the living shit out of the guy she's seeing with a horsewhip, and everyone is obviously it's because this guy is having an affair with his wife, but it genuinely is because he just can't stand to see this man abusing his horse. It's just the cruelty of it all, the unthinking cruelty is what pushes him over the edge. If it wasn't for that.
Yeah.
And then he has to renounce his beliefs, his integrity
Yeah.
by saying, oh, yes, was because of my war wound that I snapped. Because if he didn't, a society would think it was about his wife, and his wife's honor would
Yeah.
be questioned
Right.
then.
Yeah.
That he beat the guy, the lover.
Totally.
And it's just so twisted. And it's
Painful
so well
sacrifice.
done.
Painful
Yeah.
sacrifice, which is exactly the theme of the last one. Yeah.
Yes.
One is a character study more than a novel or novella or short story, and that a lot of Haley showed up in the male character in the fourth and final novella. That was my read on it. Shall we move on to the fourth and final? Chris,
Sure.
what is it called?
So New Year's Day starts with somebody saying, she was bad always. They used to meet at the Fifth Avenue Hotel, said my mother. So this is it's a male narrator talking about these people who are older of his parents' generation, but then it goes back to looking at it's Lizzie is the main character here. Mrs. Hazeldine is her name. So they're all playing cards again, I think. It's or New Year's Day, and they're having this New Year's Day party. And there's a hotel fire across the street at the Fifth Avenue Hotel. And they see Lizzie run out, and the other guy that apparently she was with go the other direction. But she freezes for this moment. And it was like so cinematic, I thought this thing. She freezes and she looks across the street and she locks eyes with somebody like a deer in the headlights kind of situation. And then she turns and starts walking home. And so the whole story is about her and this affair that she's having with this guy. And her husband is an invalid. He is not, he is in decline, even though he's a fairly young man. I think he's only like in his 30s, 40s, maybe, but he has a wasting disease of some kind. I don't remember if it's named or not. But one thing I really enjoyed is that he's a reader. And there is a line, and this is on page 255 of this edition, towards the bottom, talking about his books, because he's always getting books and he's a reader and she is not, although she has tried to become a reader. And just that it was her first encounter with a born reader, or at least the few she had known had been like her stepmother, the retired opera singer, feverish devourers of circulating library fiction. She had never before lived in a house with books in it. And gradually she starts taking pride in her husband's reading. And you get the sense that the whole time she is trying to keep everyone from being able to confirm that she's having this affair with the other guy because she doesn't want her husband to find out. but it's not what you think at all. Because do I talk about what happens?
This is the one spoiler we're going to protect you from, people. If you don't, you should probably stop watching the video because this is a pretty big spoiler.
Didn't they read the
All
book
right.
by now? They probably read the book by now.
Go ahead.
I'll be quick and just say, so the husband dies and Lizzie goes to Europe, I think, right? For a year or something like that. And she finally comes back to New York, and the man she was having the affair with comes around saying, "You didn't respond to my letters." And she's, "I didn't write to anybody." And "We can get married now." And she was like, "I want nothing to do with you." And he's, "WTF?
Yeah.
What do you mean? We're free now." And she basically says, "I was just using you for your money."
She calls herself a prostitute. It's like amazing.
Right. Yeah. She was doing it to keep her husband in books and to keep their household going. Because he was a lawyer, her husband. He obviously couldn't work. So they were facing some financial hard times. And so she was not having an affair out of passion, but to make money for herself and her husband. And that shocked me. Like, I did not see that coming at all.
Absolutely.
I thought that
Yeah.
was really well done.
And
Yeah,
that's
it's fantastic.
And what's impressive is there's even a bit earlier in the book where you see her talking to her husband, and there's this what is obvious genuine love and affection, but as you read it, you think this is, given what we know, this is a con, this is a... But in fact, it's exactly what it says on the tin. It's completely genuine. It's just that what we don't know is that, yeah, she's got this secret life for him, not...
And that it seemed perfectly natural that she was wanting to keep it from her husband because she didn't want him to know she was having an affair.
Yeah.
That it was true, plus that she was motivated to do it for his own.
What's so genius is that, like, she puts us totally into the same mindset as all the other members of the family who are staring out the window, like watching the movie of this fire happening, as it were, and the judgment, etc. And so we're like on board with that. We're like, we too are like, we see something, we think we know what that means, we are inclined to distrust this woman, and so it's a joke on us too. And I found it
Totally.
a much more profound joke than the Walt Whitman joke in a way. I really felt myself implicated in it. It's like you say, Chris, it's really impressive. I just want someone who will sleep with another person to keep me in books.
Yeah.
Why don't I have that? Yeah.
I can see why this is the last novella, because I think that is so powerful to end with that out of all four of these.
Yeah, because the book finishes with that real kick to the heart that you weren't expecting.
Yeah.
And the narrator,
So
this
good.
younger guy who knows Lizzie as an older woman and knows her in a different way and doesn't have those same kinds of judgments that the older generation does.
And maybe
but
has a
then,
little
like,
bit of a crush on her.
he totally has a crush on her. He falls for her,
Right.
and there's a moment where
Yeah.
it seems like maybe Lizzie is going to reciprocate because she doesn't have anything else left. But no, it's just like the steadfastness of her feelings. Again, in many other novels, I would think when you have a character, one character is all into books and the other is not, that ultimately the one who's not, it becomes contemptuous of the one who is. And that causes a kind of chasm to open up between them or something. That's not what happens here, as you were saying, Chris, right? Lizzie she can't become the reader that her husband was. She tries and it's not happening. But she never is. That sucks. She remains like, this is love. She loves it because he loved it. And it's like, I don't know, it's just really nice. Yeah.
And I like the way the narrator, the younger man, the first time he goes to her house and he sees all the books on the shelves and he's like, oh, this is even more reason to love her. And then it turns out it's almost a shrine to the dead husband. It's all his books kept lovingly. I think Lizzie, he says he occasionally sees her sort of turning a page of an older novel or some magazine, but that's about it. But she doesn't read. Yeah.
And I think that the young narrator in this one, we see his deeper understanding of her, which kind of reinforces what we see in her character development. And that resonates with the poverty thing, with the money thing, that what choice did she have? There's a long paragraph where he says, what choice did she have? And I'll just read the one short part of that. The self-sufficing little society of that vanished New York attached no great importance to wealth, but regarded poverty as so distasteful that it simply took no account of it.
I remember that. Yeah.
She had to make decisions about how to escape poverty. What choice did she have?
This one was the most Age of Innocency for me, which is, as far as I'm concerned, her masterpiece and one of the great 20th century novels. Of course, the first person thing makes a big difference, but in terms of it's less tragic than Age of Innocence, but in terms of like reversals of our expectations, just what point of view can do. And that's something I see in Wharton all the time, is like the shifting of a point of view just gives you completely different insight into a situation, and the way that we as readers get swept along in that, the way she makes us follow different points of view and then have these sort of sudden revelations because that come from the all of a sudden now we know more than other characters know because we've heard this person tell a story or we've heard another person tell the story of that other person. And it's very important to what she does, I think, which this is just by the by, but like it's amazing to me that I think Scorsese's Age of Innocence is such a good movie. And it's amazing to me that it could be, because like narrative point of view, that's not something films are good at. They're good at lots of other things, but that's not something they're very good at. And when you said, Chris, like that cinematic moment at the beginning of The New Year's Day, it's so cinematic. Like I can totally imagine it as a movie.
Yeah, that moment where the veil is up and
Yeah. But in general, like there are people sitting in rooms talking to each other, often in circumlocutions, and which doesn't seem like it would be necessarily very cinematic. Scorsese really did a brilliant job in that movie. But anyway, my point was simply about like point of view and perspective, like what a master she is at.
And in fact, she does something too that there are a lot of stories of that era and earlier where the narrator is not a main character, where the narrator often are these kind of slightly tedious club stories where the main character says, oh, we were all sitting down at the club one night and then someone else told this story. And so you get someone telling the story that someone else told, possibly about a third party.
This is every Joseph Conrad book ever.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And often when it was done badly, which it often was, not necessarily by Conrad, but by a lot of other writers, you have these layers of characters who don't really exist and are just there to explain things. And it's quite tedious. Whereas every layer in the telling of the story adds something to it, and character of that person comes through and inflects what you're seeing. It actually reminded me a bit of Madox's The Good Soldier. Yeah, where you have someone who's involved, but really all the dramatic stuff is happening to someone else, but the way they see it and the way they uncover it is what makes the story work the way it does.
That's good.
And actually that came out about the same time, I think.
Yeah, it's
the 20s.
10 years earlier, maybe. I feel like it's 1915 or something.
Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know if I got that right, but they're contemporaries for sure. Yeah.
We have been talking about 45, 50 minutes. So any last thoughts?
Can I just add one thing? You said something, Shawn, before about every time you saw the phrase Old New York, your ears pricked up, and I'm the same way, of course, and probably most readers would be, right, with the title and everything. So this is on page 168 of the edition that a number of us have. It's in the Old Maid. Anyway, there's a line, Old New York always thought away whatever interfered with the perfect propriety of its arrangements, which is a great Edith Wharton line, and it's, again, like that ironic omniscience, or the ironic kind of like narrator that like sort of casts a kind of like very cutting judgment, right, on this particular society. And I thought of that as such a kind of like interesting thing in this book, because again, I come back to my point about I was so interested in the way in which the date of the stories is of some important incident in them, but not usually when we're actually hearing about it. That's usually much, much later. And it's the way in which one of the easy things going on in the story is like the younger generations going, fuck, those older ones, so hidebound, and this kind of critique, whether it's coming from that third person narration or the first person narrators, even more because they're explicitly like younger, right? But the fact that this keeps happening, that this happens in the 1840s story and in the 1870s story, has this effect of undermining that point because it becomes a truism for all time. It seems like, in some sense, very pleasing to read those cutting kind of sentences and to think about a critique of that older world. But then again, the joke becomes on us if we're enjoying that too much, because it seems like no matter what the time, we can make that critique. So then what about us? And so again, the way in which the stories are not just showing other characters judging, but are manipulating us into getting involved in judgments and then pulling out the rug from underneath us and be like, why are you making a fucking judgment too, guy? I think is such a great thing that these stories that Wharton can do. Like, it's just really powerful.
And also she's showing us young people seeing through some of the hypocrisies of the older people, but she's writing this as a woman who herself was in her 60s at the time.
Yeah, totally.
So
good point. Yeah.
The other thing that struck me actually was, and I'm not American, so a lot of my understanding of American stuff, a lot of it, it's all fueled through artistic representations of the past. But you get the feeling of the Puritan past of America still infecting the way these people live. They're all wealthy people. They're all extraordinarily rich for the most part, and yet they're not. Like, there's not even anyone except that maybe the father who gets taken in the third story. There's not even anyone who takes too much drink. Their lives are not sybaritic. Their wealth is all expressed in acquisitiveness. They've got the art collection, their houses full of crap that's expensive crap. But in terms of their lives, like the fact in the last story that a New Year's party is a bit shocking and déclassé. It's quite interesting that they almost had this wealth and no culture of being able to enjoy it in any kind of non-buying stuff sense.
It does make me wonder, does anyone in any of these stories have any fun?
I suspect probably only the wife in the third one who's having all the affairs. She's enjoying herself. Everyone else isn't.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
I think her motivated more by contempt for her husband than actual
possibly,
enjoyment. But yeah, okay, I'll take that point. Yeah.
The young guy that goes off to your first story, I think he had a whale of a good time.
That's true.
He had a good time though with his girlfriend. No, am I mixing my stories up? The guy who takes the sheet to make a sail to sail over to the beach where he has sex with his girlfriend.
The beginning of the first, that's true. And she's of a different social class altogether.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. No, she's maybe allowed to have some fun because she's not from that same world, right?
Yeah. So he was having a good time. I mean, until he got, even though when he got back though from Europe and his father was shocked at the horrific paintings he brought back and just locked them away, he seemed to not maybe enjoy, but he had a passion and a mission to try and turn people
they had a
onto
happy marriage too. Like his wife
yeah, right?
Yeah.
But it was more like a mission. It was like a job.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, he even turns that like living room into this little art gallery and charges admission and stuff. Like it didn't feel to me to be that. To me, by the way, we didn't even talk about this, is like a kind of story of queer repression, because there's this like weird moment in that story where he meets this guy when he's climbing Mont Blanc, like, you know, like and this young British guy who's the one who like introduces him to good taste, it seems, etc. Like he is this kind of, it feels, and that's the guy who he like really cares about, it felt like. But anyway, but it felt like it became this job of his to try to convince the benighted old families of New York like what was really good taste.
Yeah.
So
I saw it as a passion though. That I thought it was a passion. Like that he was bucking the duty that he should have, according to his dad. Like he knew what was popular, right? And he knew what he was supposed to go and buy. But then he meets this guy to kind of steers him in a different direction. I forgot about that too.
Remember, it's very weird. It's because then the guy disappears totally from the story. It's very strange. When you say it like that, Chris, it's true that the husband in the last story, New Year's Day, with the reader who we talked about, he seems to genuinely love that. So I guess maybe he's having fun, but he's got consumption too.
Yeah.
I think that, look what happens to people who have fun.
I know, right?
Superficial things that I was delighted by in this, in terms of what the targets of the judgment, what people were being judged for. There was an old Dutch habit that people they actually stand around and look out the window.
Yeah.
And then the change was from having dinner at noon to
having dinner at
and then they switched it. And there's a whole bunch of judgment about that. I found all that.
Yeah.
Why
exhausting.
don't we leave it there? But this has been a great conflab about old New York, which I think we all heartily recommend to you all.
100%.
Yeah, this is the first one that we all agreed on.
We all like them except for Shawn. He always hates things, but even Shawn liked this book.
Yes.
They're gonna put that as a blurb on the next thing. Even Shawn liked this book.
Come on, I loved the Sun at the Front. I only disliked the first one.
All right, okay. All right.
I will reread someday, and then I'm going to do a takedown attack video on all of you as if I...
Yeah, but you'll get all our podcasts and blogs names wrong, and no one will know what you're talking about. So.
Stop bugging me, Richard. Or I'll be making a contrite video that say I do finally agree with you, Summer. So thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Shawn. Thanks, guys.